Welcome back, true crime fans.
Supermax Blueprint. From Marion to Florence. Kindly like and subscribe for the next episode. The air at USP Marion on the 22nd of October 1983 was heavy and electric. It had been building for months, whispers on the tier, coded in the cell blocks. Marion, Illinois had replaced Alcatraz as the crown jewel of federal security. It was supposed to be escape-proof, riot-proof, murder-proof. Instead, it was a powder keg waiting for a spark. The spark's name was Thomas Silverstein. Officially, he was an inmate serving a long sentence for armed robbery. Unofficially, he was a ranking figure in the Aryan Brotherhood, a gang waging bloody turf wars behind bars. For months, he had clashed live with Correctional Officer Merle Klutz, a veteran guard known for strict discipline. In the language of prison politics, they were on a collision course. On that autumn morning, Klutz approached Silverstein's cell to escort him to a meeting. It was routine, almost boring. But nothing in Marion was routine anymore. Another inmate signaled. A hidden weapon flashed. In seconds, the corridor erupted into chaos, stabbed repeatedly with a makeshift shank. Blood spread across the polished concrete like a dark mirror. The sound of alarms echoed off the walls. Guards slammed gates, radios crackled. Inmates shouted from their cells, some cheering, some silent. A federal officer lay cooling on the cell block floor. For the Bureau of Prisons, it was the nightmare they had never prepared for. A guard, murdered inside their most secure institution. For the inmates, it was a signal that even in Marion, power could shift. For Silverstein, it was the act that would define the rest of his life warden. Ralph Areola declared an immediate lockdown. Steel doors slammed, shells. Marion, once touted as a modern correctional miracle, turned overnight into a prototype of something new. A control unit prison. Inmates were now confined 23 hours a day. Programs were cancelled. Isolation. Outside the walls, Washington took notice. Reports of the murder hit the evening news. Headlines screamed, "Guard slain at federal prison." Congress demanded answers. How had the Bureau lost control of its flagship facility? Inside the Bureau's headquarters, a quiet, urgent conversation began. If Marion could not hold men like Silverstein safely, where could they be held? In the months that followed, a handful of administrators, architects, and security experts were summoned to a series of closed-door meetings. And Securius Entukis were summoned to a series of closed-door meetings. Their task was unprecedented. Design a facility that could contain the most dangerous inmates in the federal system, gang leaders, terrorists, escape artists, without putting staff at risk. "We're not building a prison," one official reportedly said. "We're building a solution." But the solution came at a cost. Inmates already locked down at Marion began to deteriorate. Lawsuits were filed. Psychologists warned about sensory deprivation. Guards whispered that they were guarding men, not ghosts. Yet the blueprint moved forward, fed by fear and political pressure. By 1986, the Bureau had a draft design, a remote site, in the high desert of Kalapur Trolls. Every cell would be a self-contained unit. Shower, desk, toilet, bed. So inmates never needed to leave. Recreation would happen in individual cages. Meals would be passed through slots. Human contact would be reduced to almost nothing. The press would later dub it the Alcatraz of the Rockies. To the men it would hold, it was simply ADX. But back in 1983, on the blood-stained floor of USP Marion, no one could yet imagine what that blueprint would become. The Bureau was still in crisis mode, trying to contain. And deep in solitary, Thomas Silverstein, The man who had lit the fuse sat in a cell within a cell, unaware that his name was already being written into the foundation of a prison not yet built. As winter closed in on Marion, strange things began to happen. Plans were rushed. Budgets ballooned. They're going to build a place to bury us alive. What no one knew then was that the murder of Merle Klutz was only the beginning, that another killing was still to come, one that would turn a desperate idea into a permanent reality and change American prisons forever. The blood on the floor of USP Marion had hardly dried before another killing ripped away any illusion that the crisis was over. Less than 24 hours after Officer Merle Klutz was stabbed to death, another correctional officer, Robert Hoffman, was ambushed and killed in a similar way. 2 federal officers murdered inside the same supposedly impenetrable prison in back-to-back days. For Washington, it was no longer a security lapse. It was an existential threat to the entire federal system. Marion went into total lockdown. Then 24. Movement between units stopped. Programs, jobs, classes, even the law library, gone. Guards patrolled with heavier gear, radios crackling constantly. Psychologists called it a prison turned into a pressure cooker. Inmates called it the Troom. Inside the Bureau of Prisons, a small crisis team huddled in windowless rooms trying to invent a future. Yes, terrorists, contract killers. Men who had turned any regular cell block into a battlefield. The conclusion was stark. The existing model couldn't hold uncertainty. Consultants were brought in under non-disclosure agreements. Architects from firms that had designed embassies and missile silos. Think of it as containment, not confinement. One memo read, "The design brief called for a facility with 0 blind spots, 0 group movement, 0 chance for an ambush. Each cell would be its own micro-prison, showers inside, mirrors through a slot, recreation alone in a cage under skylets. Corridor reinforced, every window too high to see out." The inmates left at Marion felt the shift even before the plans were public. One by one, the small privileges disappeared. The televisions were removed from common areas. Exercise was cut back. Letters were censored more tightly. A rumor spread. They are going to build a place to bury us alive. Some didn't. In Washington, Congress began quietly funding the project. Publicly, it was called the Administrative Maximum Facility. Internally, it had a simpler nickname, ADS. The chosen site was a desolate stretch of high desert outside Florence, Colorado, far from any major city where the wind carried only. At Marion, Silverstein was moved into a cell within a cell. 4 inches of poured concrete on every side, a solid steel door with a food slot. He was banned from contact visits, banned from group recreation, banned from even seeing another inmate's face. His case file carried a handwritten note. No human conclave, the most secure wing of the most secure prison, became the prototype for an entire facility. Bureau officials studied his behavior, adjusting their designs accordingly. Where he found ways to communicate, they sealed them off. Where he could see movement, they blocked the view. They were building a prison not just for bodies but for minds. Meanwhile, lawsuits began to Marion had crossed a constitutional line. Psychologists warned about sensory deprivation. Journalists wrote about men pacing in concrete boxes like caged animals. But the political momentum was unstoppable. Every headline about a murdered guard, every report of gang violence became another brick in the wall of public opinion. By 1990, 90 single cells, each a 10 by 12-foot concrete pod. Showers would be in-cell. Meals would be in-cell. Recreation would be in small outdoor cages no bigger than dog runs. Staff would move behind secure corridors and electronic doors. Interaction would be reduced to command. A quiet unease settled over some of the planners. They had built the ultimate control unit, but at what cost? One retired warden later admitted, "We built a place where a man can disappear without dying." I'm not sure we knew what that meant. Inside Marion, the inmates whispered about Florence like it was a ghost town waiting for them. Some joked that it was worse. Silverstein, reading legal papers in his cell, wrote a letter to a supporter. "They're designing my future. A box inside a box in the middle of nowhere. They think it will stop me from existing." We'll see. As winter closed in on Illinois, the work in Colorado accelerated. Concrete was poured, steel welded, cameras mounted. The Alcatraz of the Rockies was taking shape, and back at Marion, a guard walking the tier paused outside Silverstein's cell. Of a man tapping on the wall, a signal, a habit, or maybe a warning of what the Bureau was about to unleash on itself. No one could know that when ADX opened, it would not only contain men like Silverstein, but also create a new kind of prison politics, new lawsuits, new ghosts. And the first prisoner to walk into cell 118 would carry with him the blueprint of everything the Bureau had feared, and perhaps something it had created itself. In a cold morning in the spring of 1994, a convoy of white transport vans wound its way into the high desert of Colorado. Beyond a final checkpoint rose a stark complex of concrete and steel, its walls blending into the pale earth. This was the administrative Maxim's facility, ADX Florence, the culmination of a decade of fear, violence, and design born from the blood on Marion's cell block floor. The first inmates were offloaded under a silence broken only by the wind. There were no television cameras, no speeches. Each man was led through multiple sally ports, strip-searched, photographed, and locked into a cell designed to be his entire world. 10 feet by 12, the sky looked like a painted stripe, the shower inside the cell. Meals through a slot, recreation alone in a cage under skylights. Among them was Thomas Silverstein, the man whose act had set the blueprint in motion. For more than a decade, he had lived under no human contact inside Marion. Now he stepped, still shackled, into cell 1's security. A prison built for him as much as for anyone. For the Bureau of Prisons, ADX was a triumph. Administrators boasted of perfect sight lines, unbreakable doors, and a system that eliminated the risk of staff assaults. Politicians touted it as proof the government could control its most dangerous offenders. Alcatraz of the Rock, the papers called it. Escape-proof, riot-proof, murder-proof. Inside, the reality was stranger. The design that had promised total control also created a new kind of limbo. Inmates described hallucinations, panic attacks, the sense of being buried alive. Walking range 13 at night. Some swore they could hear tapping from sealed cells. Psychologists warned of long-term damage, not just to prisoners, but to staff, exposed to endless silence and isolation. Outside, the lawsuits multiplied. Civil rights lawyers used Silverstein's conditions as Exhibit A in challenges to long-term solitary confinement. Intermordants began to speak candidly about costs no one could measure. "We solved one problem," one said, "by creating another." Silverstein himself became a ghostly figure. He sketched the outlines of his cell in meticulous drawings sent to lawyers. He wrote letters describing a brain that feels like it's vibrating. Journalists called him America's most isolated prisoner. His name appeared in footnotes of court briefs, academic studies, and policy debates. A man both vilified and held up as evidence of a broken system in 2019. Before any court could force a change, Silverstein collapsed in a Colorado hospital after heart surgery. He died still technically under no human contact, a man who had outlasted the old Marion, but not the box built in its shadow. His death reignited the debate over ADX, solitary confinement, and what a society owes even its worst offenders, yet ADX. Florence remained. New inmates arrived, cartel leaders, terrorists, spies. Range 13 stayed locked down. Cell 118 was reassigned a number, but no nameplate. Officers called it the ghost cell. Some nights the wind rattled the razor wire and the pipes groaned. Inmates whispered about hearing faint tapping through the walls. The blueprint born of violence had become a permanent fixture. It had solved one problem and created another. A prison that could hold men forever meant. Whether you see Thomas Silverstein as a monster who killed a guard or a victim of state cruelty, his story and the birth of ADX Florence force a question few want to answer. How far is too far? Hit subscribe button so you don't miss the next episode.